Hi, welcome today. We're here with Peter, and Peter has had esophageal cancer, and he's going to tell us today about his experience of being diagnosed and treated and living after esophageal cancer diagnosis. So, Peter, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Francis.
So, Peter, do you want to start off by telling us maybe how you noticed there was something wrong? What kind of symptoms did you have?
That's a good start. This goes back very early in the sense that, maybe 40 odd more years ago, I used to get just heartburn, possibly when you're drinking or a night out, that kind of stuff. And with the result that if I were going, say, out for a night, I would make sure to have a packet of Rennies with me just on the way. So this would go on, and it was a nuisance. It wasn't putting in on my life to any great extent, but it was important that you wouldn't want to be out without a packet of these things. And then I saw a program on television on BBC initially about. So I had assumed that this was ulcers or something like this, and the program on television was about the elimination of heartburn through they'd always imagined that it wasn't possible for bacteria to survive in the stomach because of the stomach acid, but then they discovered that in fact there were a particular species of bacterium that was in the stomach, and they came up with a solution, I think an antibiotic and something else, and for a lot of people the heartburn and the ulcers were eliminated this way, and this impressed me. And then I saw the same program or the same theme on RT television with the Professor O'Moran, who was one of those people, who is one of those people, I'm sure, who's also kind of leading in this particular field. So I went to see him, and he did the test and said, well, in fact, you're not one of this cohort. So this particular treatment is not going to work for you because you have a thing called Barrett's esophagus. But he did say, and this was important, he said, this is something you would have to watch for the rest of your life. And so he prescribed a certain amount of antacid pills, omeprazole, I think it was, and to come and see him once in a while and be tested. And you could see it almost coming in the way that you had this, initially the heartburn, this what he called low-grade dysplasia, which is something which I understand is the cells in some way becoming slightly cancerous. The term he used to use, which should put a red flag up in most people's mind, was pre-cancerous.
Mm.
And that was fine. And I probably should have taken those pills a little more often than I did, because I remember one time he asked me, was I taking them frequently? And I said, well, maybe 50% of the time. And this, he said, that's not good enough. So then we have high grade dysplasia as the next thing. So he's really saying to watch this. Then he
And
told me,
Peter, how long, sorry, do you mind, how long was it between, you know, you getting heartburn and getting the early dysplasia and then the high dysplasia?
hard to know, maybe, I mean, periods of years anyway,
Okay.
maybe 5 years, more than that. I'm trying to think, when did I go and see him? Maybe the 1980s. But the actual operation I had was 2015. So you're talking a long span of time there, you know. But then there was to be a treatment called radio frequency ablation, was what it was. And this is where they put a sort of thing like a limp balloon down, and they actually burn off these cells, which are the ones that are kind of a red flag cells. So I went up and I had the first of these treatment in St. James's in Dublin here, and that was fine. And then I was to go back for the second one, and the guy said to me after, he said, well, he said, and these are the words, this is the moment that nobody should wish. He said, I've seen something I don't like. And he showed me the picture of it, and you could see this sort of red blotch. Now, there's two lessons in that, if you wish. The first one is that lifestyle is very important. Now, I don't know what causes it. Maybe somebody somewhere does. Maybe there's a lot of research that goes into this. Is it genetic? Is it hereditary? In my case, I heard one instance of it in my family, but certainly I can say this much, that being overweight, drinking a lot of alcohol, smoking, taking no exercise, all of those are things which I did. So if they are the cause, then I was putting myself in the front rank for them. And the second lesson is that everybody, but certainly those people who have any hint of those symptoms, should be checked regularly, because as you know better than I do, it's an illness more or less without symptoms, or by the time you get the symptoms, you may be in deep trouble. And I, since that time, have lost two good friends to the same illness. So it's there, it's silent, and it's to be watched. So after this man says, I've seen something I don't like. And interestingly enough, the first of those radio frequency things, I think, was in June of 2015. Yeah. The next one was September. And this thing had appeared in that time. And he actually wondered, had he missed it the first time? So he went back and looked at the photographs from June as opposed to September. And he could see nothing in June. And there it was. So that impressed them with the idea that this thing was fast growing. So there's a conveyor belt then, there's a conference of all the various medical professionals involved. And I think it was November, I think, 2015 that I had the operation. And that's, as anyone will tell you, it's a severe operation. And this is Professor Reynolds was the person, and I have the highest of regard for all of those people and him, that they're very well practiced in what they do, and the care that they give is quite extraordinary. And you can say that without that sort of care, I wouldn't be here talking to you. That's for certain. So the operation is severe. I think they remove a good section of the stomach, and they build some of what they have left into a sort of a substitute esophagus. And there was the operation, I think, was many hours, I think, and there were 2 people at work in that, and you wake up, you're in the high dependency thing and so forth, and it's recovery is unpleasant. There's no sense in saying that it's not, because you sit on the side of the bed and they want you to cough, and you understand as well that pneumonia is a big danger and lung function is a big danger. And it probably stood to me in the sense that they did say that my lungs were in good state. And again, there were people in there, people who were in a parallel path with me who sadly didn't ever make it. And I think pneumonia was what did for them, So to that extent, lung function, it just takes you back to exercise and good health, the things that are common sense. So there was some minor hiccup, all right, about the recovery thing, that I had to go in again for a fortnight, and that was okay. That was just part of it. And interestingly enough, you have no appetite. Food, I found, actually repelled me after this thing. And for that fortnight when I had to go in again, it actually happened to be at Christmas. You're in the bed looking at television and watching cookery programs on various stations, and all you have is a sort of thing like a plastic lollipop which you're allowed to dip in water and moisten your lips. And I was getting feed into the arm for I think about 18 of the 24 hours a day, so not pleasant. And I did ask one of the nurses, all right, I said, I don't believe that I'm ever going to want food again. Such was the revulsion at it. But she said to me, nobody ever loses their appetite. And gradually, and this is the wonder of the whole thing, that, gradually these things come back. And I know that on Christmas Day, I enjoyed it and I was able to have a reasonable amount of food. And on we went, and around May of then 2016, I remember that I was able to, starting from being able to go up the road holding onto railings along the way for 50 meters, you gradually build up. Going up the stairs is a bit of a trouble, but I would have come back to myself. I would say by May I went back to work, and since then it doesn't trouble me, this thing, at all. I don't eat. You can't, when you don't have a large stomach, you don't eat to the same extent, so you eat smaller. But in fact, this just doesn't disturb me. You sleep on a number of pillows. You don't want to sleep flat down. But this may seem perverse, but actually I found the whole thing a benefit, because I was about 17 stone beforehand and probably increasing. Now I am about 12 and a half to 13, and I was told that that my weight can never, will never increase, couldn't, no matter what, because you have the limited amount of capacity. So I have to say that that, like, there's a great moment when you're told afterwards that this thing is gone. You're now cancer free. But of course, as I say, that they were able to say to me because it was caught so early. And my understanding is, and I'm not a medical professional, is that if it goes on and if it sort of breaks through the walls of the esophagus, then it reaches these lymph nodes. I'm sure this is a very amateuristic representation of the whole thing, and then it travels to other parts of the body. But when it was local and all removed, I think one of them said to me, there's as much chance of the person who was talking catching it as there is of you. So now I'm here and it doesn't trouble me greatly, and I just am grateful that I came through the thing. You might regard it as a sort of an extra lease of life, and you do view life in a certainly slightly different way, a slightly more precious thing to you, that you can breathe in a way. So that's really that is the story of it, such as it is. But the lesson is, I would say, keep an eye on it closely, and don't. If you drink, do it moderately. Don't smoke, because that's a ridiculous habit anyway. Take plenty of exercise. Maybe watch your weight in some way, and all those things, and that gives you your best chance. And I suppose if you are being checked regularly, and the procedures, to check is only, it's a morning, and you're sedated, and they put down a camera and they see what they see. If you do that, I can imagine that you likely would avoid this thing in some way. And I'm just sorry that more people don't do that.
Yeah, Peter, thank you very much. And you mentioned something really important there, which is the Barrett's esophagus and the heartburn. I mean, that's something to really keep an eye on, isn't it, for people if they have heartburn, to get that checked.
Well, if you have that, yes, you must get checked, because it's happening for a reason. It mightn't necessarily be this, but my understanding is the heartburn in some way kind of pulses or triggers the cells to behave in a different fashion, to try to emulate the cells in the stomach itself, that the esophagus cells are not quite the same, but they want to become like their brethren down below to resist the acid. So, maybe the whole thing is I wouldn't say simple, but it's easier for me as a layperson to comprehend. So I would say to everyone, check it out, and just mind your lifestyle and so forth. No doubt about that. I'm sure there are genetic, hereditary things as well going on here, and I can imagine that if not in my lifetime, but in a next generation's lifetime, there will be some form of genetic profiling that will be able to tell people quite early on, you're a mark for this. Be ultra careful here. There must be hereditary genetic things. And I did discover that what would be my great-grandfather in County Wexford, you're talking about probably the early years of the 1900s, did have a similar thing. But you can be grateful for today's surgical intervention, because this poor unfortunate, as I understand it, just gradually this thing grew and grew and grew, and he couldn't eat, and someone said that it could be known as the starving illness, because eventually you'd probably go from solid food to soup to tea to nothing. And where does that leave you? So at least we can be grateful that the interventions that I was privileged to receive in St. James's were there for me, that weren't there for this poor man.
Yeah, Peter, and that's the other thing, that how important is research to esophageal cancer survival and quality of life afterwards.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, all for anything that can direct towards discovering why it is, to discovering how to deal with it, and all those things has to be signally important. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And Peter, it's wonderful to see you so well after. Do you still have to get checked? Do you still, do you continue not to smoke? Do you continue with the antacids? It's really great to see you so well.
Yeah, I do get regularly checked. You should do, of course. I don't eat that much, because I say I can't do it. Yes, there is one particular thing, that when the operation happens, I think people who don't have this, who haven't had the operation, have a sort of a valve which, let's say, keeps food below. In the course of the operation, and because of the complexity of it and what has to happen, that valve is no longer with you. It goes. So that means that there's more chance of the acid surfacing, I think. So that means that, yes, I would take antacids in the morning and in the evening. And you learn. I remember the phrase actually Professor Reynolds used to me. He said that he talked about adapting to it, and you do this. You wouldn't eat a large meal before going to bed, or too much. So you would leave a gap for this sort of stuff to digest, because the digestion happens now in the small intestine rather than in the stomach. So in the early times, all right, I might have, in particular, and I like it too, you might have Indian food, but that's one you have to watch. If you have that possibly, and then you go to bed and you roll over in bed, you can have a very unpleasant time with not so much acid, but what I found out was apparently what surfaced or would come up was bile, and that is deeply, deeply unpleasant. Okay. So that would be sufficient to deter me from having a large hot meal, or that, a hot spicy sort of meal before going. I would have that maybe about 7 p.m. and go. But I just learned. I learned the hard way a couple of nights. When the bile thing came up, you had to sit maybe for an hour waiting for the tide to sort of go out. But that was deeply unpleasant, I can say. So there are those adaptations. You have the 3 pillows and you hope not to slip off them. But that's so small a price to pay for me that I'm not pushed about that, And as I say, it actually led me towards a healthier diet and a healthier way of life. And my understanding is that the operation that I had you can construct an analogy between that and people who go in to have a sort of a stomach tucking thing to lose weight. That I received this as a sort of a side benefit, a byproduct, a beneficial byproduct. So I have no lifestyle complaints at all, and I actually think, and it's perverse, and it's obviously not an advertisement for anyone to go out seeking this illness, but I would say that there were pluses for me in it in a strange way, psychological pluses and physical health pluses.
Yeah, you say you have a deeper, appreciation of life, which is
you do. There's an element of second chance about the whole thing, of course. I think, as you may have said, you really only get to know about these things if you have some personal contact with them. But so many people in Ireland do. I mean, I should imagine that at least 1 in 2 people, I don't know if they don't have it themselves, they certainly know people who have, and it's a rough thing. It's a rough thing.
Yeah. Peter, thank you so much. That was so wonderful to hear your experience, and such a good experience, to come through such adversity. The messages I'm hearing is get checked, good, live well, and, appreciate life, but also, keep an eye on yourself. And and go and get checked. Don't ignore symptoms, and and then you can survive this.
I think they're common sense things, and I think they would apply to I think those are common sense things, and I think they would apply to every person to be moderate in all those things. Moderation, but not to turn into some sort of Jansenistic have no fun kind of aspect in life. But there's a good way to be about things, which is to travel roughly in the path, in the middle of the path. That's true.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Peter. That was really, really inspiring, really. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks. Welcome.